There's a moment, a silent, still moment, when a woman realizes that her power doesn't come from who walks beside her, but from who she becomes when she walks alone, not lonely. There's a sacred kind of blessing that finds her in that solitude, a kind that transforms, heals, and leads her back to herself. Today I want to speak to that woman, the woman who walks alone, the woman who listens within, because God blesses her differently. We often misunderstand what it means to walk alone. Too many of us see solitude as a symptom of sadness, as something to be fixed or pitied. But walking alone is not a sign that you've been left behind. It's not proof that you've failed to connect or that you've missed your chance to belong. Walking alone is one of the strongest things a person can do. It's not about isolation, it's about identity. It's not about being forgotten, it's remembering who you are when the noise dies down. There is a sacred kind of courage that emerges in silence. And that silence, that space where it's just you and your breath and your convictions. That's where real transformation begins. Picture Rosa Parks for a moment, not the icon, but the woman. The woman who sat down not because she was tired in body, but because she was tired in spirit. Tired of waiting for change, tired of waiting for permission, tired of waiting for a crowd. That bus seat didn't become a symbol of revolution because of a roaring applause. It became sacred because of one woman, one moment, one choice. No fanfare, no backup, just unshakable inner strength. When we talk about leadership, we often imagine someone standing at a podium or leading a team into battle. But what if leadership is quieter than we think? What if it looks more like someone taking the first step down a path no one else is brave enough to follow? We're conditioned to crave applause, conditioned to believe that our value is somehow tied to the number of people watching us, supporting us, liking our posts, following our journey. But walking alone demands we release all of that. It requires that we let go of the scoreboard and the spotlight. It teaches us that the loudest approval we'll ever need is the whisper of our own conscience saying, "You're doing the right thing." This kind of strength is not theatrical. It's not loud or dramatic. It's not the kind of strength that gets trending hashtags or viral videos. It's divine, it's raw, it's real. It's the strength that builds empires out of ashes and movements out of moments. It's the strength of the person who dares to say, "Even if no one claps for me, I will still dance." Because here's the truth, those who walk alone aren't lost. They're just ahead of their time. Think of the innovators, the trailblazers, the visionaries, the ones we quote, celebrate, study, the ones who wrote the blueprints the rest of us follow. They didn't start with fanfare. Most of them started with rejection, with skepticism, with silence, but they kept walking. Not because the world told them they were right, but because something deep inside them refused to let them turn back. That's the difference. That's the power. We live in a world that celebrates consensus. We equate unity with safety, but sometimes the most dangerous thing we can do is follow the crowd. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is say, "I'm going this way, even if I'm going alone." Not to prove a point, not to be different, but because our inner truth won't let us do anything else. Walking alone isn't easy. It's full of doubt. There are days when the silence feels suffocating, when the path ahead looks blurry, when you start questioning everything. But it's in those very moments when the world is quiet and you're left with nothing but your thoughts, that you find the answers that truly matter. Solitude strips us bare. It peels away the performance, the pleasing, the pretending. And in that rawness we meet ourselves. We remember who we are without the filters, without the noise. We find our real voice, the one that doesn't need to shout to be heard because it carries the weight of truth. And that voice, that's where strength lives. Because the ones who walk alone today become the ones the world follows tomorrow. Not because they shouted the loudest, but because they walked with the most courage. They didn't wait for others to believe in their mission. They became the mission. So if you find yourself walking a path where no one joins you, if your ideas are met with silence, don't let that silence turn into shame. Let it be your proving ground. Let it refine you, not define you. Let it teach you what you're really made of. Because the ones who change the world are not always surrounded by fans. They are not always decorated with titles or validated with awards. Often they're the ones who sat alone when everyone else stood. The ones who spoke up when it was safer to stay silent. The ones who moved forward when it was more comfortable to stay still. To walk alone is to say, "I don't need permission to be powerful." It's to plant your feet in your own truth and trust that the ground beneath you will hold, even if no one else believes it will. This is not weakness. This is not isolation. This is the sacred act of owning your own voice, your own purpose, your own path. So the next time you find yourself walking alone, remember this. You are not alone in spirit. You are walking in the company of every soul who ever dared to believe in something bigger than themselves. You are walking with the same fire that fueled revolutionaries, dreamers, and healers. You are walking with strength the world may not yet recognize, but one day it will. And when it does, it won't be because you waited for the applause. It'll be because you chose to dance anyway. There comes a moment in every person's life when the noise of the world becomes too loud to ignore, but the volume inside their soul rises even higher. urging them to turn inward, to listen, to remember who they were before the world told them who to. And when a woman listens, truly listens, not to the opinions, not to the trends, not to the applause or the algorithm, but to that small, steady voice within, something remarkable happens. She stops chasing validation and starts choosing alignment. She no longer asks, do they approve of me? Instead, am I honoring who I really am? That's where real identity is born. Not in the spotlight, not in the comments section, not in the title on a business card, but in the quiet, that sacred, unshakable space where the truth lives. I want to tell you about a woman I met at a conference. Though her presence alone could have filled the room, there was something about her, an ease, a groundedness, not the kind that comes from arrogance, but the kind that comes from knowing. She had once been in a high-powered, six-figure job, climbing a ladder that most people would kill to touch. From the outside, she was the picture of success, but on the inside, something didn't fit. She wasn't failing. In fact, she was thriving. Just not in the way that made her soul light up. It was like she was winning the wrong race. So she walked away, not in a blaze of drama or rebellion. Quietly, intentionally, courageously, and she did something that most people will spend a lifetime avoiding. She faced herself. For 18 months, Aisha turned in. She didn't immediately chase the next big thing. She didn't leap from one identity to another, hoping to be saved by external purpose. No, she chose the slow path, the sacred path, journaling, praying, reading, listening, healing. She allowed herself to unravel, to release the labels she'd been handed, and to find out what was left when everything else was stripped away. That's where the real power lives. In the moment you stop performing and start aligning, in the space where silence becomes your sanctuary and not your fear. And here's the thing, when you choose to go inward, it's not glamorous, it's not something you can post about every day. It doesn't come with a medal or a headline. It's lonely, and it's hard, and it will test every ounce of your patience. But it is true, it is real, it is where your unshakable identity begins. Aisha didn't return with a resume, she returned with a revelation that her purpose was not to build someone else's empire, but to become a sanctuary for others. Today she owns a wellness center, but more than that, she's become a mirror for women who forgot their reflection. She helps them come home to themselves, and not because she has all the answers, but because she once had the courage to ask the hard questions. That kind of clarity does not come in the crowd. You don't find it scrolling endlessly, or comparing relentlessly. You find it in the quiet moments, when the world isn't watching, when it's just you and your truth and the choice to either numb it or nurture it. So many of us are trained to look outward. We measure our worth by the reaction we receive, not the resonance we feel. But when a woman turns inward, she stops asking what the world expects of her, and starts asking what her soul is calling her to do. She stops chasing attention and starts cultivating intention. And something incredible happens. She becomes rooted, not rigid, but rooted. So when the world shakes, and it will shake, she doesn't fall apart, because her identity is not hanging by a thread of public opinion. It's anchored in something deeper, something sacred, something no one else can take away or define for her. The problem is, we've been conditioned to fear the quiet. We've been taught that rest is laziness, that stillness is weakness, that not knowing is failure. But the quiet is not the absence of progress. It's the birthplace of transformation. It takes far more courage to pause than far more strength to be still than to be seen. And yet that is where you meet the real you. The you that existed before the world shaped you, before the shame buried you, before the fear limited you. And from that place, from that deep knowing, a woman rises up not as someone who needs to prove herself, but as someone who knows herself. She begins to speak not to be heard, but because her words carry truth. She begins to move not to impress, but because she's in alignment. She begins to build not for applause, but for purpose. That is what happens when a woman focuses within. She becomes a force, not loud but powerful, not flashy, but magnetic, not perfect but whole. And make no mistake, this world doesn't need more women who conform. It needs more women who come alive. It needs more women who are deeply connected to themselves. Because when one woman remembers who she is, she reminds others of who they've always been. Aisha is not an exception. She is an invitation to every woman who's ever wondered, is there more? Yes, there is. But you won't find it by doing more, chasing more, being more for everyone else. You'll find it when you decide to come home to yourself. You'll find it in the quiet, and from there everything changes. Isolation, a word that often sends shivers down our spine. We're conditioned to avoid it, to run from it, to see it as a sign of something broken, as if being alone is synonymous with being abandoned. But what if we've had it all wrong? What if isolation isn't the absence of connection, but the presence of possibility? What if solitude isn't a void to be feared, but a space carved out for brilliance to be born? Some of the most transformative ideas, movements, and innovations the world has ever seen were conceived in the quiet, unseen corners of solitude. They weren't birthed in boardrooms or brainstorms, but in bedrooms, basements, and back corners of cafes. Because when the noise fades, something else begins to speak. In isolation, we begin to hear a deeper voice, the whisper of what could be. Think of the single mother sitting in a cafe, not for inspiration but for warmth. Her life hanging by threads, emotions fragile, and finances fractured. No one would have pegged her as the next global phenomenon. But there she was, writing, creating a world out of pain, casting spells not just on pages but on her own future. She wasn't just building a story, she was building a bridge out of depression, out of obscurity into destiny. That woman was J.K. Rowling, and the boy wizard she imagined while sipping coffee became more than a character. He became a cultural touchstone, a symbol, proof that magic can rise from misery. We love the highlight reel. We celebrate the stage, the success, the standing ovation. But few stop to consider where it really begins. In the silence, in the struggle, in the stark, lonely places where no one is clapping, where no one is watching, where no one believes, except the person who's still showing up. Because isolation strips away the noise. It removes the applause, the distraction, the expectations. It forces you to look inward, to confront what's real. And when you do, you find that the answers you were searching for externally have always been waiting inside. We spend so much time trying to fit in, to belong, to be seen. But the irony is, our greatest breakthroughs happen when no one is looking. It's when we're not seen by others that we truly begin to see ourselves. We often think that innovation requires resources, connections, a team, a strategy. But more often than not, it just requires space, sacred stillness, where ideas can breathe and dreams can stretch. When you're isolated, you're not being punished. You're being prepared, you're not being overlooked. You're being refined. Sometimes the cocoon feels like confinement, but it's actually transformation in progress. We misunderstand isolation because we fear it. And we fear it because we associate it with loneliness, with emptiness. But isolation isn't loneliness. It's alignment. It's your soul lining up with your purpose, without the distortion of other people's opinions. It's not a withdrawal but a retreat, a divine strategy, a moment of intentional hiding so you can emerge with something the world has never seen. There's a reason prophets went to the desert, why visionaries retreat to the woods, why monks sit in silence. Because in isolation the soul gets loud, the distractions die down, and what's eternal begins to echo. Innovation isn't always about disruption. Sometimes it's about listening so closely that you begin to hear things that don't exist yet. The unseen becomes visible. The impossible begins to take shape. Let's be clear, this isn't romanticism. Isolation is uncomfortable. It can be painful. But pain doesn't mean absence of purpose. In fact, pain is often the evidence of preparation. It's the tension before the takeoff, the mess before the masterpiece. There's a reason diamonds are forged under pressure, and pearls are formed in irritation. Creation often comes through discomfort. So if you're in a season of isolation, don't rush out of it. Don't numb it, avoid it, or try to escape it. Lean in. Ask yourself, what is this space trying to teach me? What is this silence trying to say? Because the greatest ideas are rarely shouted. They're whispered. And those whispers don't happen in the crowd. They happen in the quiet. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to us is being left alone with our thoughts. Not to drown in them, but to discover in them, to mine the gold that's been buried beneath the noise of the world. To realize that we've been looking for confirmation from people who can't see our vision because it wasn't given to them. It was given to us. And yes, it's terrifying. It's terrifying to build something when no one is cheering, to dream something no one else understands, to create without certainty. But it's also sacred, because in that solitude we meet the truest version of ourselves. The one unfiltered by expectation, unshaped by comparison. And from that place we can create not what the world expects, but what it desperately needs. The world didn't ask for Harry Potter. No one was looking for it. But now millions can't imagine a world without it. That's the power of unseen work. That's the power of isolated innovation. When you're in the dark, it doesn't mean you're lost. It means you're planting seeds. And just because no one can see them yet doesn't mean they aren't growing. Some of the most beautiful things grow underground before they ever break the surface. So to the one in the cafe, the garage, the bedroom floor with nothing but a pen, a laptop, a vision, you're not behind. You're not forgotten. You're in the middle of something sacred, a divine incubation. And what you're creating in the quiet has the power to shake the world in the noise. Don't despise the season. Embrace it. Because isolation isn't the end of your story, it's the beginning of your breakthrough. Every day women wake up and walk into a world that is already shouting. Before their feet touch the floor, the noise begins. Subtle, sharp, relentless. Be prettier, be quieter, be stronger, but not too strong. Smile more. Don't be too loud. Be perfect, but only in a way that makes others comfortable. It's not just the world that whispers these commands. Sometimes it's the media. Sometimes it's family. Sometimes it's the voice in their own heads, shaped by a lifetime of listening to everything but themselves. This is not just pressure. It's a form of erosion. Slowly, over time, it wears away at the truth of who a woman is until she begins to question her own instincts, doubt her own decisions, and look to others to define her worth. And yet there comes a moment, a crack in the noise, a breath between expectations, when she turns inward. It might happen in the silence after heartbreak, or in the stillness of exhaustion, or in the pause between chapters of her life, and in that space something extraordinary begins. She realizes that the world will always have something to say. There will always be a standard she's supposed to meet, a box she's expected to fit in. But she also begins to understand that those expectations were never designed for her growth, her healing, or her liberation. They were designed to keep her occupied, busy proving her value rather than recognizing it. So she makes a different choice. She turns her gaze inward, not to escape the world, but to reclaim herself from it. That shift is not passive. It is revolutionary. It's not weakness. It's wisdom. Because when a woman stops seeking validation in the eyes of others, she begins to see herself with clarity, not through the distorted lens of too much or not enough, but through the sacred lens of truth. That's when everything changes. She stops asking, "What do they think of me?" and starts asking, "What do I think of me?" She stops shrinking to fit rooms that were never built to hold her fullness. She stops waiting for permission to be powerful. And she begins to understand something so simple, so profound, it changes the trajectory of her life. I am not here to meet your expectation. I am here to meet my destiny. And when she says that, not just with her words, but with her choices, something seismic happens. The emotional chains start to loosen. The need to explain, justify, or apologize for her truth begins to fade. And she learns to hold space for herself, in a world that rarely does. This is not about arrogance. This is not about being indifferent to others. This is about sovereignty, emotional sovereignty, the ability to feel deeply without being defined by the chaos around her, the ability to respond, not react, to choose stillness over spiraling, to claim joy, not as a fleeting reward but as a birthright. She learns that power is not something she has to take from others. It's something she has to stop giving away. And how often have women been taught to do just that? To give and give until there's nothing left. To put everyone else's needs above their own. And call it love. To silence their truth and call it peace. But that's not peace. That's people pleasing with a prettier name. And it costs too much. It costs sleep. It costs dreams. But when she learns to turn inward, to listen to the quiet voice inside her that's been waiting to be heard, she starts to reclaim what was lost. She begins to regulate her emotions not by bending the world to her will, but by becoming the master of her inner world. And that mastery is not control. It's not coldness. It's not pretending to be unaffected. It's the courage to feel without being overrun. It's the strength to be soft. It's the audacity to say, "This is how I feel," without shame or performance. That is not selfishness. That is self-respect. And self-respect does something radical. It changes how she speaks, how she walks, how she shows up, not just in boardrooms or on stages, but in the quiet spaces of her life, in her relationships, in her choice, in the way she sets boundaries, not as walls but as declarations of what she is no longer willing to compromise. This kind of inner focus isn't just personal, it's contagious. It ripples outward. When one woman stands in her power, she gives silent permission to others to do the same. She becomes a mirror, not of perfection, but of possibility. And when women everywhere start choosing sovereignty over survival, truth over approval, authenticity over accommodation, the world doesn't just change for them. It changes, period. So yes, the world will keep pulling. It will keep telling stories about who she should be. But the woman who has turned inward, who has claimed herself from the noise, knows better now. She knows she doesn't need to be liked to be worthy. She doesn't need to be chosen to be whole. She doesn't need to be understood to be free. Because she understands herself, Because she has chosen herself. Because she has remembered who she was before the world told her who to be. And that memory, that returning, is the most powerful revolution there is. There comes a moment in a woman's life, a pivotal soul-shifting moment, when she realizes she no longer needs to be chosen. Not by a man, not by a group, not by a job, or a trend, or even by the world. In that moment, she becomes something far more powerful than chosen. She becomes aligned with something deeper, something greater, something eternal. It's in this quiet revolution of the heart where the magnetic shift begins. Because what she once chased, she now attracts. And not because she's trying harder, but because she's no longer trying at all. She's just being, and that being is rooted in truth. When a woman walks alone with purpose, she is not walking in loneliness. She's walking in clarity. And clarity is rare. Clarity is divine. Clarity is dangerous to everything that's false. You ever notice how the right people show up when you're not looking? Not when you're desperate. Not when you're scrolling late at night trying to fill the ache. But when you're focused. When you're grounded. When you've quietly committed to your own path. Even if no one claps for you. Even if no one understands it. That's when alignment reveals its gifts. It's not magic. It's not luck. It's resonance. You've stopped broadcasting your fears, and you've started vibrating in purpose. And purpose doesn't need to shout. It whispers. And those meant to walk beside you will hear it. See, the world taught her to be chosen, to be appealing, to be desirable enough for someone else to say, yes, you're good enough to be mine. But when she lets that go, when she stops performing for approval, something miraculous happens. Her life no longer operates on audition, it operates on alignment. The shift is so subtle yet seismic. She goes from trying to be seen to simply seeing. Seeing what belongs. Seeing what doesn't. Seeing her own worth without waiting for someone else to confirm it. And here's the most beautiful part. When she walks alone, she is never truly alone. Because something sacred begins to walk with her. Call it faith. Call it God. Call it the divine. Call it purpose. Whatever name you give it. It's the force that has always been there, patiently waiting for her to stop running from herself. It's the voice that says, I've been here the whole time. I was just waiting for you to listen. And when she listens, really listens, everything changes. Not because her circumstances instantly shift, but because she does. She stops accepting half love. She stops tolerating almost respect. She stops shrinking to fit into places that were never designed for her brilliance. Because now she knows who walks with her. And when you know who walks with you, you no longer fear what walks away. That's the irony of walking alone. The world may see solitude as weakness, but in reality it's the refining fire. It's in walking alone that she finds her voice, her fire, her unwavering no, and her even more powerful yes. Yes to what lights her up. Yes to what brings peace instead of chaos. Yes to what mirrors her value instead of questioning. She becomes a woman who doesn't just take up space. She honors it, and then it happens. Without her effort, without her asking, the right people begin to find her. Not because she chased them, but because her presence called to something deeper in them. Because light doesn't beg to be seen, it simply shines. And those walking in darkness will always be drawn to it. But here's the difference now. She no longer dims herself for those unready. She no longer molds herself into what's palatable. She simply walks, and lets the path decide who can walk beside her. Purpose has a frequency. It can't be faked. It can't be dressed up or sold. And when she walks in it, everything not vibrating on that same level begins to fall away. At first that can feel like loss, but over time it feels like freedom. Because now she's no longer weighed down by people or plans that weren't meant for her future. She's lighter, stronger, sharper, and deeply connected to what matters most. She becomes a woman of depth in a world obsessed with surf, a woman of stillness in a culture that praises hustle, a woman of vision in a society addicted to distraction. And though that might make her misunderstood at times, it will never make her misaligned. She's found the path, the narrow, unglamorous, often silent one, that leads to wholeness. Not applause, not validation, wholeness. And there is something holy about a woman who chooses wholeness over attention. Something unstoppable about a woman who knows that her worth isn't measured by how many chase her, but by how deeply she honors the call within her. Something magnetic about a woman who walks alone, not out of bitterness, but out of reverence for the journey she's on. Because when she walks alone, God walks with her. And when God walks with her, every step becomes sacred. Every no becomes protection. Every yes becomes a miracle. And every moment becomes a brushstroke in a masterpiece she couldn't have painted on her own. So if she's walking alone now, don't pity her. Don't worry for her. Don't ask her when she'll settle down. She's already settled into herself. Settled into truth. Settled into purpose. And in that alignment, she's no longer waiting to be chosen. She is the choosing. There's a silence that speaks louder than applause. A stillness more powerful than motion. A moment of solitude that carries more weight than 1,000 conversations. And it's in this space, this often misunderstood, sometimes painful, almost always lonely space, that greatness begins. Not on the mountaintop, not in the spotlight, but in the shadows, where the world isn't watching. We live in a culture that praises visibility. If you're not seen, you're not significant. If you're not heard, you don't matter. That's the lie. That's the noise we've been fed. And yet some of the most powerful transformations in history didn't happen in public. They happened in isolation, behind closed doors, in the wilderness, in the quiet. Because the most meaningful impact starts not with an audience, but with authenticity. Not with applause, but with alignment. Solitude is not exile. It's evolution. It's the place where we wrestle with our doubts, our dreams, our demons, where we strip away everything we thought we needed. The titles, the validation, the comparisons, and we meet the unfiltered version of ourselves. The version that doesn't perform, the version that doesn't hide, the version that dares to ask, who am I becoming? The woman who walks alone isn't weak. She's waking up, she's not retreating. She's resetting, she's building strength. Not for the sake of survival, but for the sake of service. Because what she's preparing for is not just a return. It's a rise. Like Esther, like Malala, like so many who came before her, and many who will come after. Their solitude wasn't punishment, it was preparation. Esther didn't fast and pray in a palace. She did it in private, in the tension of knowing what was at stake. A nation, a people, a legacy. And in that silence she found clarity. Not because someone handed it to her, but because she fought for it. She chose courage over comfort. And when the time came, she walked into that room not wondering if she was enough, but knowing she had already become what the moment required. And Malala, a young girl, whose voice had been silenced, who had walked through the valley of violence, who could have disappeared into the background of history, but instead her solitude became her forge. Each quiet moment, a sharpening, each step through fear a strength, until the day came when her voice wasn't just heard. It echoed across the world. You don't have to be famous to make impact. You don't need a stage to have significance. What you need is the willingness to be refined, when no one is watching, to lean into the silence and let it shape you, to see the wilderness not as a place of loss, but a place of learning, a place where you remember what you're really made of. You're not forgotten, you're being formed, not for comfort, not for convenience, but for contribution. You're being readied for a moment when the world will need what only you can give. And when that moment comes, you won't need to pretend, you won't need to perform, because you'll be walking into it as someone who's already been tested, tempered, transformed. That's the thing about solitude, it breaks what was never meant to last. The illusions, the ego, the expectations, and it builds what no spotlight ever could. Conviction, character, calling. So if you find yourself alone right now, don't rush to escape it. Don't panic. Don't numb it. Let it do its work. Let it stretch you. Let it strip you down to something unshakable. Because the ones who change the world aren't the ones who are always celebrated. They're the ones who endured the silence and didn't let it swallow them. This is the paradox of growth. The moment you feel most invisible might be the moment you're becoming most invaluable. The refining doesn't happen in front of the crowd. It happens in the cave where you confront your fears, the cave where you grieve the things you had to let go, the cave where you wrestle with your worth. Not to prove it, but to own it. This is your season of becoming, not waiting, not wasting, becoming. And it's not easy, it's not pretty, but it's holy, because every tear, every unanswered question, every long night alone, it's not meaningless, it's making you. And when you emerge, you won't just walk into the world. You'll walk with something, a presence, a purpose, a peace that doesn't shake when the world does. You'll walk in like Esther, with the quiet power of someone who has wrestled with destiny and decided to show up anyway. You'll speak like Malala, with a voice that carries weight, not because it's loud, but because it's rooted. You'll move through the world not as someone trying to be seen, but as someone who knows they were never invisible to begin with. So hold the silence, honor the solitude, let it prepare you, because the world doesn't need more noise. It needs people who have been quiet long enough to know what actually matters. People who can see through the fog of fame and reach for something deeper, something lasting. When you rise, and you will rise, it won't be for recognition. It'll be for responsibility, because your story won't just be about surviving the wilderness. It'll be about using what the wilderness taught you to lead others out of it. You're not alone, you're not behind, you're not broken, you're being built. So stay the course, stay faithful, and when the time comes, step forward, not as someone who's finally ready, but as someone who's always been becoming. So if you're in a season where it feels like it's just you, if the phone doesn't ring, if the room feels empty, if no one understands your silence, know this: God is not punishing you. He's preparing you. Blessed is the woman who walks alone, because she's never really alone. And when she finally speaks, moves, builds, creates, the world will recognize the power that was always in her, because she took the time to find it within. Thank